NPS Now, your source for news and information about Norfolk Public Schools. I'm your host, Karen Tanner. And with me today is Diane Gibson, principal of Tarrallton Elementary School, and Stacy Bright, the music teacher at Tarrallton Elementary School. Welcome, ladies, to NPS Now.
Thank you.
I'm excited to have you on the show today. It's great to see you today, and there are some exciting things happening at Tarrallton that's coming up shortly. And one of them is your school is turning 50 years old.
Yes.
I know you're excited about that. So tell me a little history about your school at Tarrallton.
Okay, it was built in 1964, and the first class actually came in February of 1964. So we're a little late in celebrating. However, this would have been the first full year for our students. When it was built for a capacity of 600 students, and it's been through a lot of changes with population. Hewitt Farms was built, which expanded the population, and then 10 years later it was raised. And I've been at Tarrallton 12 years, and since I've been there, housing was rebuilt again. Mm-hmm. So we have gone through population changes, and we were rezoned. So we are truly a community school. We have no buses now. Most of our children come from the military housing and the surrounding area.
So you have a lot of walkers.
We do. Walkers and car riders.
Walkers and car riders. So tell me, Stacy and Diane, this question is for both of you. What type of celebration do you have set up for this 50th anniversary?
All right, we've been working very carefully and closely for a long time, but the seed was planted last summer. And Miss Bright has a wonderful committee with parents and teachers. And we always have done a diversity night with PTA. Mm-hmm. So this year we're expanding it to be diversity and 50th.
So how is that going to work, Stacy? What do you have planned?
Well, we have some performances coming up. The Norfolk Public Schools All-City Jazz Band is going to be playing some selections, and our 5th grade chorus is also going to be singing some songs from the 60s up until now. And we're going to have some speakers as well. I believe Rodney Jordan is coming to speak about the importance of parent involvement within the school.
Great. So who did you all invite? Did you find the alumni or any people who were past, students that attended the school?
I have been speaking about it since this summer, and as I've gone around, I've found that some teachers actually, when I was at Larrymore, said they went, and so I told them and took their phone numbers. And we have a neighborhood that's generational, and we also have a recreation center that a lot of our students who have left Tarrallton and our seniors come back to work with the recreation center, so we're getting the word out through them as well.
Well, this is important. When is it?
It is next Friday, the 20th, from 5:30 to 7 o'clock.
Wow, that's going to be exciting. And I guess one more thing, too, you have other exciting things happening, and one other one in particular. The National PTA gave you a grant for the National Take Your Family to School Day. I think that's what it is, or
yes,
School Week.
It's a week.
And you guys won this grant out of the entire United States. A couple of the schools, I believe, won too. Stacey, tell me about that.
Well, there were 50 grants that they were going to award throughout the U.S., and we actually won one of them because one of our advocates in Norfolk, she's always advocating for students, she wrote a grant so that Tarrallton could actually win it from it's the AXA Equity Foundation, and we were lucky enough to get one of them to help promote our week at school.
So what is that week going to look like?
Well, we have Bring Your Parents to Lunch for next week, and then also during the week we'll be doing activities to get ready for Diversity Night. We have parents from other cultures that will be presenting. They may present a dance, they may come in their costumes, and then there's the food, which is phenomenal. That's always a wonderful addition. And we've had stations set up before for the different countries, and actually some of the Boy Scouts have even come to earn a badge because it is an international celebration.
So you do the Diversity Week every week, but this time with this grant, you're going to use this grant to help put on this Diversity Week.
Yes.
Yes.
What type of foods? I mean, is it parents bringing in food, or is it vendors or different cultures coming in bringing in food?
Well, the parents who are talking about their culture, they get to make dishes if they want to, but we also fill in, you know, because we're not going to have enough for everybody if it's just parents supplying. But so the PTA also helps to supply with, you know, decorations and foods and things like that. And honestly, most of the foods that I've seen that the parents have written that they're going to make, I don't know how to pronounce them because, you know, they're from other countries. I've Googled a couple of them and they look really good.
What are some of the countries when they're showing diversity in your school? And this is the diversity within your school, correct?
Yes, I know we have Guam.
And Mexico and Belize and
Wow.
I forgot the other one.
So why do you think it's important to even have a diversity week with your school?
Everybody needs to be celebrated. You know, it always can't just be about America, the wonderful country that we live in, but there are other people that want to share about where they come from. And there's nothing wrong with that because a lot of us don't know anything about other countries outside of the United States. And the kids, they always show so much pride and their parents are always so excited. I feel like the parents are usually more excited than the kids are about diversity night because it's their chance to show everybody where they come from and how they speak and how they dress and how they eat and communicate.
Right, so it sounds like it's going to be an exciting time for your school.
It's one of my favorite events.
Really? So you've been doing it for how many years?
This way, I think maybe 3 or 4. The years before that, we did something a little bit different, but yeah. Like all the kids, they get their own passport to walk around to each country and they write something about the country and then they bring it to us and we'll stamp their passport and they'll get something, you know, like a gold coin or something like that.
So how many countries are you all doing, if they have a little stamp
This
pad?
year, we're probably up to about 14 or 15 countries this year, maybe more.
Wow, that's great. That's great. Tarrallton has a lot going on. So if someone's interested in coming to the 50th anniversary, give us some more recapped information of who do they contact, who do they see in order to be involved?
They can contact our school office, 531-1800, and we hope that you will come. We want as many people and alumni to come as possible.
Great.
It's going to be a fun family night.
Wow, sounds exciting. Between that and your diversity night, sounds like you're going to have a great time. Well, we'd like to thank you all for coming on this show, sharing information about that, and we hope that you'll have some participation from the parents, and hopefully next year you'll apply for that grant again. Shout out to Peggy Scott, who's a hard worker for your PTA, for coming up with this grant, and that we want it in order to bring parents and families together and teachers. So again, thank you guys for coming on this show.
Sure.
Thank you for having us.
Yes,
Great.
thank you.
And we want you to stay tuned for more NPS Now. Welcome back to NPS Now. In honor of African American History Month, we'd like to share with you a special video from our Channel 47 archives, highlighting some of the rich history here in Norfolk. Joining me in this video is Dr. Cassandra Newby-Alexander, Professor of History at Norfolk State University, who I interviewed over 20 years ago for this special segment on the African American Civil War soldiers interred in Norfolk.
Cemeteries have their own unique personalities and characteristics. The different tombstones display the religious and ethnic symbols of the individuals buried there. West Point has its own symbol to designate its African American soldiers who fought in the Civil War and World War I. What's the symbol that represents West Point and its soldiers? Historian Cassandra Newby explains.
I would have to say it's this beautiful monument that's standing right in front of me, dedicated to the war heroes, the black war heroes of the Civil War. And I think it embodies the spirit of this cemetery.
So what is the history of this cemetery?
Oh, it has a very long history, very complicated, but to simplify it, back in 1877, there were black leaders who were looking for the city to provide them with equal facilities as they had for the whites. And they started with Potter's Field, and then that developed into Calvary Cemetery, and then finally into West Point Cemetery in 1877. And it wasn't until a few years later that we began to see what we have today, all of the monuments, the headstones, and then finally this beautiful monument. And you know, it's the only monument in the entire South that's dedicated to the black heroes of the Civil War.
Bordered by Armistead Avenue and Princess Anne Road, West Point is a part of Elmwood Cemetery.
Tell me about the African American soldiers buried out here.
Well, as you can see, there are a number of tombstones or headstones. There are about 100, even where you don't see headstones. Many of them have fallen into disrepair and so forth over the years that they've been here. But when the monument was dedicated, a number of these men had died prior to the monument being completed. And for example, this man, George Whitehurst, he served in the 1st United States Colored Cavalry. And he was a native Norfolkian, and he was enlisted here in Norfolk in 1863 in December, and that's when a large number were enlisted. And he died in 1879 of something that was very common, consumption, which we call tuberculosis today. Okay. But he is a good example of those who died before the monument was established and who were subsequently either reinterred and buried here in this special spot to commemorate those who served in the war, or they were buried here and they simply, in this plot of land, began burying men around the other areas. There are just so many other, I guess you might say, heroes of the war. There's a man by the name of George Ackes. He's buried right over here. He served in the 2nd United States Colored Infantry. Okay. And he was a very interesting man. He lived here for many, many years and died, I'd say probably about 1909, 1910. So he died about the time the monument was established. And what's interesting about him is he served in a regiment that really was prominent during that time. The 2nd, the 36th, 37th, 38th, they were commemorated for many of their battles. The Battle of Deep Bottom and in North Carolina and here in Virginia. Elijah Simmons, he was in the 36th U.S. Colored Infantry. Now he became a decorated soldier for his actions in the Deep Bottom battle. And he was also a person who didn't enlist until he was 45 years old.
45 years old? 45.
Most people are too familiar with the Vietnam War. Most of the young men, 18, 19, 20, served in that war. But during the Civil War, you had a lot of people who were 26, 27, 30, 35, and he, 45, served in the war and fought.
Before West Point, those who perished during the war were not guaranteed a proper burial place. West Point was made possible due to the valiant efforts of Councilmember James Fuller, who petitioned the Common Council to designate the area for African American soldiers.
James Fuller, though, was the first black city council member. He served on the Common Council. There were 2 councils, the Select and the Common, much like the House and the Senate. And he served from 1881 to 1889, and after that, then you had the takeover of Jim Crowism and segregation, and there were no blacks who served on the city council until Joe Jordan. But Fuller was a man who seemed very dedicated to the black cause and to providing facilities for blacks in the city. And he felt that because blacks in this country, African Americans, for years had spilled their blood in fighting for this nation and for freedom, that they needed a place of recognition.
The statue of an African American Union soldier holding a regulation rifle rests upon a huge stone base with graduated steps. Fuller never saw his dream completed, for he died in 1909. His project took 34 years to complete and was officially finished in 1920. Annual recognition continued until 1929, but for the next 40 years there was a lapse in the celebration of West Point. However, in 1972, the Reverend Joseph Green and his wife renewed interest in West Point by reinstituting the celebration and calling it Heritage Day. Heritage Day, a day to reflect, remember, and acknowledge Norfolk's African American soldiers with pride, dignity, and respect for the courageous roles they portrayed in shaping our American history. West Point Cemetery, a symbol of heritage in Norfolk, an important part of our city's history, the final resting place of those unsung heroes who surrendered their lives to make a difference in our country.
Stay tuned for more discussion on African American history here in Norfolk with Dr. Cassandra Newby-Alexander. Thank you for staying tuned to NPS Now. With me today is Dr. Cassandra Newby-Alexander, Professor of History at Norfolk State University. Thank you for joining me here on NPS Now.
Thank you for the invitation.
And I had the awesome opportunity, as we just had a nice little giggle, 20 years ago, yes. I had the opportunity to interview you over at West Point Cemetery. That's part of Elmwood Cemetery, and you shared some rich history about here in Norfolk.
You know, there's so much history in Norfolk. You throw a coin and you hit history. And it's unfortunate that so many people don't know about this rich heritage. And that's why I've worked with the Visit Norfolk Center to produce 2 maps that help people to understand the history of the Underground Railroad, as well as our Civil War history.
So you're involved in history at Norfolk State. Tell me a little bit about your role there.
I'm a professor of history at Norfolk State. I specialize in African American history. I have also worked to create the Joseph Jenkins Roberts Center for African Diaspora Studies. And this is in honor of Joseph Jenkins Roberts, who was born in Norfolk, and he became the first black governor and led the nation to its independence and became the first president of Liberia. And he represents the world of a lot of African Americans who came out of this area, and they settled in Liberia, they settled in Sierra Leone, in Halifax, Nova Scotia, in Toronto, Canada, and in many other places throughout this country.
Yeah, I was enthralled 20-something years ago when I found out we actually had a place where we buried the Civil War soldiers.
Yes, in fact, since that program, Portsmouth erected a monument dedicated to some of their Civil War veterans who were African American in one of the private cemeteries there. But Norfolk still remains the only one that has a monument in a public place, in a public cemetery. And since that episode, we also found out that at the top of the monument, the soldier represented was born in 1840 in Norfolk. His name was William Carney. And he became the first African American to be awarded the Medal of Honor based on his role in the assault on Fort Wagner in 1863. He had escaped to New Bedford with his family, and in 1863, when they had a call for people to enlist in the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, he went forward, and during the assault, he was actually shot 3 times. He was shot in the leg, in the head, wow, and then the shoulder. Managed to survive years, decades after that. It took them 37 years before they finally awarded him the Medal of Honor in 1900. And he would go around and make speeches and talk about his experiences. And so the people in Norfolk remembered him because some of his family members were still here in the city. And they wanted a place that would be the memorial, because West Point Cemetery was a part of the old fairground. And it was in that location that the first Emancipation Day Parade celebration, that was the largest in the country of African Americans as well as whites who supported the Union, January 1st, 1863, they ended up at the fairgrounds, which is where that cemetery is located, here in Norfolk, and they had this big celebration. They had speeches and so forth, talking about what they hoped would be a new era in America. And so African Americans really apparently felt the need to make sure that that space be commemorated for now until in perpetuity, where our children will not forget the sacrifices that their ancestors made.
There's so much rich history in Norfolk, and I know a lot of people watching this show today did not know any of this probably, or little bits and pieces, but you have a rich history here in Norfolk with your family.
Well, you know, peeling back many layers, sometimes it takes years to do that. And so my father's family, I understand originally, years and years ago, came from Surrey County. Sometime perhaps in the 1850s or 1860s, they migrated to the city of Norfolk. And so my grandfather, who was born in 1899, grew up here in the city and eventually went to Hampton, at that time Hampton Institute, now Hampton University, received his degree in teaching. He would eventually go on to graduate school and became principal at Rosemont. In fact, Rosemont was just getting built, and he was named the principal
here
there.
In Norfolk.
Here in Norfolk.
Wow.
And one of his sons eventually became principal at Booker T. Washington High School, the youngest son, Thomas. Both of my aunts went into teaching, and my father was the first board-certified African-American physician in internal medicine here in the city, and had the largest practice among African-Americans before his death, and was also the first African-American appointed to the City Planning Commission.
Wow.
And I have two brothers who are physicians in the city. One is in family medicine, and the other is in cardiology. Both owned their own buildings at one point.
Wow. That's a lot of great history. I didn't know that. I didn't know that about your family.
That's just my father's side. On my father's mother's side, she actually had a grandfather and a granduncle who graduated from Ashman College in 1858 and went over to Liberia as missionaries. So Liberia is a really special place in my heart, with that family connection, and eventually they came back to this country, and that's when my grandmother was born. She was actually born in Abbeville, South Carolina, a place where her parents were teachers. Actually, her father was the principal at an institute there that was later burned down by the Ku Klux Klan.
Wow.
And they had to flee South Carolina because of the pressure. And fortunately, I guess, that meant that she ended up attending Hampton Institute, where she met my grandfather.
Well, your family has such deep-rooted background history here in Norfolk. Now I'm realizing with Booker T. Washington, but right across the street from Booker T, there's a library named Jordan Newby. How did that come about?
Some years ago, I guess there was a political move to rename what was the Bramilton Library in honor of two family groups who, whose members had done a lot for the community, and one was the Jordan family. Joe Jordan and of course Rodney Jordan has been very important in the history of this area, an advocate for African American education, currently on the school board, and then my family, the Newby family. And so they actually cited all the people that I just mentioned as part of the reason that they felt it was important to name the library after these two family groups.
So how long has it been named Jordan Newby Library?
Oh, I was afraid you were going to ask me that as a historian. story, and I should
many
know.
years.
For many years. It's been close to 20 years now.
Okay, great. And being a history professor, you know a lot of history, a lot of rich history here in Norfolk. What are some other little-known Black history facts about Norfolk, especially in education, that you'd like to share?
Norfolk was the first place during the Civil War that schools for African Americans were started. And Harper's Weekly actually published an illustration of the students and the teachers in front of the original building that is now St. John's AME Church. So right there on Butte Street, the school opened up one day at AME Church, and the next day it opened up at the historic First Baptist Church on Butte Street. And so it was interesting because you started out with maybe 50 students the first day, then the next day there were 150. By the end of the month there were over 1,000 students being educated just in those two churches. And they also educated adults in the evening. And one of the people who had been a member of First Baptist Church, her name was Mary Kelsey. She had learned how, she was a free Black, she learned how to read and write. She had actually gone to school before the Nat Turner Revolt. After that revolt, Virginia shut down all education for free Blacks. And she returned back home to Norfolk and eventually started a secret school at First Baptist Church. So she began to educate a lot of people who would later become the leaders here in Norfolk. And then her mother met a man from Hampton, married him, and they went over to Hampton. So the whole family moved over there, and that's where she met a man by the name of Thomas Peake, who had recently become a free Black. They got married, had a family. They had one daughter. And at the very start of the war, African Americans pushed that envelope and got Benjamin Butler to begin protecting them after his contraband decision that said that any able-bodied African American men who were used by the Confederacy to help fight against the Union government would be declared contrabands of war. Therefore, they didn't have to return them. They could keep them there and provide sanctuary. And because so many women and children also fled to the fort, he said for humanitarian purposes he would extend protection to them as well. And so Mary Peake, who had been a member of the First Baptist Church over in Hampton, and this is the Black First Baptist Church, began to educate. She had been educating a lot of the young people and just about all the leadership in Hampton as well, and she started educating all of the children of these refugees. In fact, there's a illustration showing her teaching under a huge oak tree that's the sibling of the oldest oak tree, live oak tree in Hampton Roads that's at Fort Monroe called Algernon. Well, this oak tree that she used to educate the children under eventually got the name Emancipation Oak. And so here you have in Hampton Roads one individual, a young woman, and by the way, she died of tuberculosis at the very early age of 39. She impacted tremendously the lives, the leadership of the people in two entirely different cities. And so this area is so rich in the importance of education, in especially women pioneering, opening up opportunities for those in education. And the list just goes on and on.
What other history do you know about our schools here in Norfolk?
Well, there was a school called Norfolk Mission College, and it's where the Blyden Library is currently. That was the site of this institution, and it was started by the Presbyterian Church in the 1880s for the singular purpose of educating African American leaders, not those who would be trained in vocational work, but rather those who would go on to either the teaching professions or they would go on to other professions like medicine or law or they would become entrepreneurs, or, you know, one of those kinds of professions. And Norfolk Mission College was a really important institution in helping to educate many, many leaders and many future principals in the Norfolk area. Not just in Norfolk, I just say the Norfolk area, but we're talking about all of Hampton Roads. They had a liberal arts education, which was very different than Hampton, that did not have the liberal arts education. It had more of the vocational industrial training education. And so a lot of people who wanted to go on to universities, such as Howard University, went to Norfolk Mission College. And Norfolk Mission College eventually was phased out as a separate entity, purchased by the city of Norfolk, and it became eventually the site of Booker T. Washington High School. And then over the years, different buildings, 2 different buildings were constructed. And unfortunately, the building, which was a beautiful, huge building, was torn down. And so there's nothing that remains of it aside from the bell. And the bell was preserved by Norfolk State University. So if you go into the library, you will see the bell of Norfolk Mission College.
You've shared so much great history here in Norfolk. How can we, if they're not watching this show or after seeing the show, kind of get our students to know all this great history? How can we, and what's your opinion of how we can do that so they can learn this rich history about Norfolk?
Well, the school systems are driven by SOLs. And I would say that teachers and parents should advocate that our SOLs include information about our local history, so that we can become more aware, because there's studies out there that show that when students engage in their local history, when they visit sites, museums, historic sites, that it connects them with the past. People are not three-dimensional figures. Excuse me, they are three-dimensional figures. They're not simple. People today, just as people in the past, are very complex. And that complexity is what you learn when you visit the sites and you have people talking about it. I also encourage them to visit our website. I've worked with the city, and we have a Waterways to Freedom website where they can learn about the Underground Railroad.
So it's a lot of great opportunities. I thank you for coming on the show 20 years later, but it's great to have you back. You've shared some great information with us, and I hope we inspired and intrigued people's minds about the rich history, African-American history here in Norfolk. Thank you for joining me on the show. We want to thank you for watching NPS Now. It airs weekly on WNPS, Channel 47, or you can view us online at www.npsk12.com. Any great story ideas or information you'd like to share, you can email us at npsnews@npsk12.com. Thank you for watching NPS Now.